So today we want to talk about intuition in general, right? So introverted intuition,
Mm-hmm.
extroverted intuition, how they're different, how they're the same, and some examples of both. So, ZachXBlade, you want to take it away with some high level points about intuition, which applies to both introverted and extroverted?
Absolutely. And right off the bat, in the chapter that we read, Jung says intuition's hard to understand at a conscious level because inherently it's an unconscious process. I mean, if we think about what intuition just means as a word, um, there's some sort of understanding of something and you don't quite know where it's coming from. I think one of the biggest things across both extroverted and introverted intuition that I took it from this is the idea of pattern recognition. It's noticing where there are similarities between things that aren't necessarily super clear how they're connected, but it's
Yeah.
finding those bridges between these distant topics and combining them to make a new possibility.
And where it's looking to in order to make connections, that varies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it is making connections nonetheless. I think the easiest, like, high level way to describe it is in images, right? So Jung describes it as an image that you get from your unconscious into your conscious mind that provides you some kind of idea or insight or answer to something, right? And it comes from the unconscious. He said specifically, likely from the collective unconscious. So basically, like the entirety of knowledge and actions of human history, kind of coming into your consciousness. But no one knows, right, what is in there necessarily or how it came to be or what it even means. But just to put it simply, it's basically just an image to your mind, like some realization, some noticing a connection, a pattern that comes from your unconscious to your conscious mind.
On that, I a lot of what was covered in the chapter is this idea that intuition is really focused on objects. So focused on outside data, inside data, whatever, but it's focused on something, and it's not necessarily just looking at it, but it's actually actively shaping and changing our perceptions of things. Because at least in the case of the extroverted intuitive, which we'll get into more detail in a bit here, there really is this focus on generating these new possibilities by shaping the information you get from the world around you. But that at the same time raises this question: is our intuition spontaneously generating new things, or is it like reconfiguring existing knowledge from the collective unconscious? Now, is that something that we can necessarily pin down and exactly answer? I don't
No, probably
necessarily
not.
know. I don't think so.
I mean,
And
maybe, but probably not. I don't think we can ever pin it down. But you did touch on the extroverted intuitive. And I think that's a good transition point. So, how does this manifest in the extroverted intuitive, right? So, someone with extroverted intuition as their lead function. So, that's going to be an ENTP and an ENFP, right? So how do you see that actually playing out?
I think the quickest way to think about it is this emphasis on new ideas. And for you being an ENTP, and I'm not an ENFP, but my extrovert intuition is second place in my stack, so I do feel like it's a function I use too. So both of us, we're people that really do tend to jump around a lot from idea to idea. And in one of your most recent videos that you put out, you were talking about being an extroverted intuitive. You do tend to have this almost like real big excitement about an idea and then drop it and move on to the next. And it's almost like,
Totally.
whoa, what happened to that last idea? Like I thought you were super into that. But I think it's not
That's so cool.
necessarily an inherently bad thing. There's really, it's just extroverted intuition is always looking for a new possibility. It is always looking to generate something new in the world.
Yeah.
With all of these topics, it's really easy to contrast it to other topics within it. And within the chapter, extroverted sensing is described as the ultimate focus on reality, on actuality, whereas extroverted intuition is the absolute emphasis on possibility as opposed to actuality.
Right. Yeah, and I'll add on to that too. It's like they kind of look similar at times because they're both pretty engaged with the physical world in a way. But for the extroverted intuitive, so someone with NE, their senses, what they actually perceive is more so a data point for their intuition. It's not their focus. Like, yeah, they might perceive a sense, but it's part of a larger intuitive vision, right? And that's a big difference too between NI and NE is with NE, it looks to the outside world more generative because it's focused on the object. It's like the focus is outside of the self. An example would be you hear about a new technology that comes out, right? Any would go, oh, like I have this idea for how to make it better. And oh, this type of person might really like it. And oh, I don't like this about the design. I think this could be better tweaked this way. Or, but it's very focused on idea generation about external things, about the thing itself. And so it looks to people to be generative. I'll use the same example in introverted intuition when we get to that section. It is also very generative, I would say, but you don't see it because it's not about the object. It's not about things outside of the self.
So I think this is an interesting place, having one of us as a dominant extroverted intuitive and one of us as an auxiliary extroverted intuitive.
Yeah.
I think, and we talked about this the other day, when you were describing what it's like seeing the world primarily through extroverted intuition. Because for me, my introverted feeling, my first function really colors everything my extroverted intuition is going to do.
Yeah.
But I find that when I'm going through the world and engaging with new things, new topics, I tend to hold things almost at a distance at first. And not so much to say like, oh, I don't care about this, but it's more so I don't need to feel like sometimes I don't need to feel an immediate judgment about something. I just want to see it for what it is. And for me, when I'm out in the world exploring, I feel very non-judgmental about ideas. I wonder how much of that is the NE process. How much of that is being able to take data from the world and just look at it pretty objectively, just understanding like, hey, this is what's coming in and maybe something new can come of it, even if I don't like it, like even if it doesn't match with my own values, my own morals.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it really depends where you're at, right? Because if you're using primarily extroverted intuition and you're not using any judgment functions, um, it doesn't matter whether you like something or not. Your opinion doesn't necessarily matter that much. Um, what I would describe it is just like being in this perpetual state of ideas and like playing out scenarios in your head and images in your head about like things that you see or things that you think about, and it kind of builds on top of each other. But it's a lot of imagining realities, and it's not even like a reality that you necessarily like or don't like. Like an example would be like, oh, I don't know if this has happened to me, but an easy to understand example is just like, say I like meet someone, like, and he's like my friend instantly, right? Then you might just like play out all these scenarios of like things that you could do with them as your new friend. um, or come up with all these scenarios in your head about it. Um, it doesn't mean that I feel a connection to the person. It's not because of the connection. It's just like now I just want to envision everything about this new thing, this new object in my life, right? So I think that's really what NE is. It's just the possibilities within the physical world. And I think it's hard in a lot of ways because by design, the extroverted intuitive is never satisfied with anything, right? So something Jung talks about in the book is you come up with something new or you think of something new is in your purview, and you think, this is the thing. This is what I'm going to devote my time and energy into. And it looks that way to other people too because you're so engrossed in the thing, like you're so into it. But once you've maximized whatever you perceive its potential to be, you just don't care about it anymore. It's done. It's like trash. And if you can't discard it like trash because, say, it's like a job or you're married or just like something major, like yeah, that sounds fucked up, but I'm just speaking.
Throw your spouse away. Spoken like a true any dom.
But like, you can't do that, right? So when you
Absolutely,
can't
yeah.
just discard of something and move on, it starts to feel like a prison. Like that is a very common thing. It's like things in your life that are not necessarily constrictive. Like it's not necessarily constricting to have a job or to like have a boyfriend or something. It can be if they're like super controlling or whatever, but it doesn't have to be that way. But just the act of not being able to dive into whatever possibility that you want to dive into is restrictive for the extroverted intuitive. It feels like a jail, truly. Um, so it is something that can be dangerous. And I think Jung does talk a lot about the pitfalls of this type, right? Like how it
Oh,
can
he
be.
talks about a lot of pitfalls of it.
Yeah, dude. Like, I mean, what are some that you can think of right now?
Well, I think I want to stay here for a minute. Just this idea of feeling stuck and feeling trapped. I
Yeah,
think we we as people are limited. Like we're not endless idea spontaneous generators,
no,
right? We all have limited cognitive resources. We're limited by what we know. Maybe we can create some new knowledge, but if you think about the old saying, there is nothing new under the sun. We're not really eventually, let's say you've gotten data from something, you're eventually going to run out of new things to think about it. If it's let's say a startup that you're working on and it's really exciting and it's really cool and you're building it and you're working on this company, but you get to a point where it's like it becomes, maybe you've built it to a point where it almost becomes mundane and you no longer need to do anything new, and it's more so just maintaining what now exists.
that's
At
torture.
that point, it's torture because you don't have any new possibilities. That's not to say that there aren't any, but that's why I say we're all limited. You're bound by human limitations. You just might not be, and I don't mean you in particular, but just we just might not be able to think of anything new. And once you're there, you're stuck. It's almost like writer's block, but for the world,
Well, and
your worldview.
like you're not at the same time because like yeah, you're out of ideas or you feel like you've maximized the potential of
Mm-hmm.
that one thing, but that's why you want to move on. And that's why the extroverted intuitive does move on, right? That's why they can take on this appearance of like hopping from thing to thing, because for, they're looking to be obsessed. I think that's the thing. Like, any really looks to be obsessed with something, and they will almost lose themselves in the possibility of something. And then when they either realize that thing can't be what they thought it would be, or they feel like they've gone as close to that vision as they can, they do want to discard it, I think, at that point. And even if they do hit that vision that they thought, like you maximize this potential to what you thought it could be, that moment is not exciting, because perceiving that moment would require you to use, like really perceiving that moment would require you to use your SI or your SE, which is so underdeveloped that it will never live up to this developed, super used function that is extroverted intuition. So even if you maximize the potential, A, you don't enjoy it that much when you actually get there. And B, you'll just get reckless, or sorry, you'll get restless and start looking for new possibilities again. Like for an any dom, there's never this state when you are done, where this is the thing. That's it's like counter to extroverted intuition to do that. You will always be searching. You will always be looking in a way. And there are a lot of
I,
pitfalls to that, of course.
I wonder then if so. I think that extroverted intuition can be pretty present and in the moment, and I think both NE and SE as functions are good at allowing an individual to really be there and present. But at the same time, by virtue of NE being so focused on future possibilities and combining that with the idea that this is an inherently unconscious process, meaning at least even if it's extroverted, at least some of it has to be done internally.
Yeah.
I wonder what ways can an any, especially an any dom, but in any user ground themselves in the world to stay fully present. Just for me, being in any a secondary any user, I find that I can kind of ground myself from fully going into idea land by primarily using that introverted feeling, that judgment that allows me to, before I even do any ideating, basically plant a flag and say, I'm already like, this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
Now that I have this home base of my feeling, of my introverted feeling, I can go explore and go figure out what possibilities are there.
Yeah.
So for me, it works really well in the sense that that's my primary function. But I'm curious for you, since the any is your first thing, where do you feel like maybe your other functions, or what helps you stay present and stay in the moment?
Well, I do a really shitty job at it, to be honest with you.
Fair enough.
I think, I mean, my TI, but I can ignore it, you know?
Say more on that. What do you mean?
Just avoid judgment. Like, just avoid, keep putting off the moment where I actually think about something. So I can be in this like 3 week state of mostly perceiving. And that's like so much fun for me. Um, but Jung does talk about this too. He talks about unconscious functions or functions that you're neglecting coming out in like these neurotic ways, right? Eventually, what makes me come back to my judgment is the fact that I start having all these like crazy thoughts about real things that I'm ignoring, real judgments that I'm not making. And I usually just call it tweaking, right? But I'll like start tweaking. And so I'll be like, okay, I got to like sit down and just like analyze everything that I've been thinking about. Um, Throw away the shit that doesn't matter and focus on the things that do, right? So I think that's like one way. Um, I think another way is doing things with other people. Because of FE, I do really care about how I look. Um, so like doing this with you or having a workout partner for something. Like I don't want to look like a bitch, frankly, by not completing something. Right? So I think that's like another way to stay grounded and stay consistent with something. Um, Another way I think is also to intentionally try to be in the moment, right? So I think being really active helps. Like when I force myself to like do physical activity regularly, I think that kind of brings me back a little bit into concrete reality. Like I said, writing. Um, And then I think also just meditating, maybe like something that, again, just brings you back to the present moment and grounds you a little bit, right? So those are all ways that I like try. But if I'm left to my own devices and I don't intentionally do something, I will just like, I can just be thinking for weeks about random possibilities and like barely engaging with the outside world in a practical way unless I'm like forced to, right? With like a work reason, um, or like, the real life emergency, whatever.
And this isn't even necessarily a functions or MBTI thing, but just as a human level, it is a lot easier and safer to live in idea world than actually out there and engaging in things. Because out in the real world, you can fail and things won't go right. And the things that you have planned, these ideas that we can generate that
Hmm.
are so great and so wonderful, they can fall apart so easily as soon as you get out there. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're not wonderful ideas anymore. And so that's just a human thing. That's not even necessarily
Yeah.
focused on this.
I mean, I think that's part of it. I just think it's honestly more fun to be in that headspace too. Like, um, for any inferior type, like say an ISFJ or ISTJ, they might have these visions under stress that any Dom people have, but it'll be like of things going wrong, right? And so
Mm.
Ideal Land is not always this beautiful place of where anything is possible and I have this vision that I really am interested in, right? I mean, it can also generate negative emotions and negative uh, frameworks, like all these negative thoughts about things. Um, so I don't think it's as simple as like this is idea and it's easier for everyone to be in this state. Like some people don't like being in that state.
I want to ask, within using extroverted intuition, where, when it comes down to decisions and particular decisions about things that matter to you, like morally, where where does that play in, this idea of, because if you're focused on the future, that could potentially mean sacrificing current things if you're so focused on future goals. But where do you find that plays in for you?
Like morality.
Sure.
Uh, I mean, I think morality at times can be disregarded, right? I think when I was younger and I had other function or my other functions were not as developed, maybe um, I would just, like I said, discard things, right? Like I was really good friends with someone, I got bored, I stopped mostly talking to them, and like not maliciously, but I just wasn't that interested anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But these were real people with real feelings who develop a real attachment, right? Or like same with that, or same with like I think you can just disregard how your need for novelty affects other people, like how it can hurt or just not even hurt but just affect people when you keep switching things, because other things can involve other people and it can evolve involve their affection, it can involve how they've structured their lives, like around something that you're doing, right? So I think NE can't ignore those things. I think with the development of my TI and then later FE, it's like, okay, I realize that I can't just jump from thing to thing forever. I mean, I think I can on a macro sense, but like you have to at least do something for a somewhat extended period of time, um, to get at least like somewhat good at it to where you can make money, right, as an adult. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think there's a level of that. Um, and then so I think and there's that, and then I think just TI morality, um, like adopting different types of moral frameworks that I think matter to me. Um, I think that's one way. And then with the development of my FE now, and I mean, this guy has known me since I was a kid. And I think you've seen that development. But with the development of FE, like I just care. Like I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't want to like fuck up their lives. So that makes me, when I'm doing something and I get to this point where I want to leave, it's like, how can I introduce novelty? How can I introduce excitement into the thing without leaving? If A, there's no TI reason to leave, and B, it's going to hurt someone else if I leave, right? And sometimes I do that successfully, and sometimes I do a very poor job, and I end up messing it up anyways. So, and I mean, according to Jung, right, like perception will always win. So if you're a lead NE type, your rational functions, or I guess your judgment functions, so your thinking and feeling functions, they can only keep your intuition sustained for so long before you start disregarding your judgment functions, because you just don't value them as much. Eventually you erupt and you want to do something different. But anyways, I do want to jump into NI. We said earlier that NE and NI are both intuitive functions that come out as images to the consciousness. The extroverted intuition has to do with the object, so everything outside of the self. How would you describe its introverted counterpart?
I think it classifies things in one's head, but not necessarily classifying and organizing things in a systematic way that it's like, oh, the red files go with the red files and the blue files go with the blue files. I see it more as organizing things mentally in a way that just makes sense to you. And that's the intuitive part. It's you can't necessarily explain why these things make sense to you, but it's this pattern recognition on the inside, this internal pattern recognition that just seems to make sense.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that too. So earlier I used the example of like a new technology coming out, right? And extroverted intuition might be like, oh, these are all the things you can do with it. This is a way to make it better. This is a way to make it appeal to this type of person. But it essentially just deals with how to deal with the object in the outside world. And I might get some type of input from that new technology, right? But then they might go back to that collective unconscious, or they might go back inside their brain and think about how that makes them think about technology and its development and whether it's good for the world or not, right? So it can deal with the outside world, as in the outside world can give it inputs, but ultimately it's a way of perceiving what is going on inside your mind and what is going on in the unconscious and the collective unconscious. So it might manifest itself as like insights or thought processes about like society at large, or um, like a deeper narrative, a deeper meaning of something, right? And they don't necessarily know where this is coming from, but they're really looking into those rooms. So Jung uses an example, which you touched on this when you were describing introverted sensing. He talked about somebody that was dizzy, right? And the introverted sensor will really understand intimately all of the ways that the dizziness impacted them physically, right? So I felt this way. It lasted this long. It was very unpleasant. Like it was just like everything about the actual sensation of the thing, they will understand that and they will catalog it. Introverted intuition also notices the thing, but it doesn't take into account the sensory stuff. It's almost everything that introverted sensing ignores. It's the why. What is the deeper meaning of this input that is coming in? SI doesn't do that, right? SI just, it doesn't really look for the deeper meaning, or it doesn't look to the collective unconscious. It's just like,
it takes it more at face value, I think.
totally, totally.
You said there that introverted intuition can ignore the sensory information, and I think there's kind of like a stereotype that often comes true of there's a lot of spaciness within, especially NI DOMs.
Totally.
There's just my fiance is an INFJ, and she can just be so out of the moment. Like, she will be around people, surrounded by people, and she will just get so sucked into her own little world, and you can talk to her, and it's not like she's ignoring you because she doesn't care what you're saying. It's like she is so blocking out everything sensory, and it's because whatever ideas are being connected in her head, whatever new possibilities, because again, it's intuition, it's still all about possibilities, but she's doing that whole process internally.
Mhm.
And if the more you're going to do intuition, the more you have to suppress sensation, just vice versa. The more you're going to engage in your senses, the more you have to suppress your intuition. And I think by being this already kind of weird, nebulous behavior of intuition that's already coming from the unconscious, and then when you put it on the inside, it's like a black box. It's like we don't really know what's going on in there.
Oh
It's
yeah.
really hard to pin down what processes are happening, at least with you and I as extroverted intuitives. At least our process is more so happening out in the world where we're coming
Mhm.
up with these possibilities. But
Yeah, and it's
for the
about the
NI,
world. Like
it's about the world. Yeah.
yeah, well,
It's
and
about the world, and it's apparent that it's about the world.
yeah, yeah, totally. I think that's the thing. Like INFJs, it can also be about the world, but it's about, like, they might get like a hit of some deep understanding about the world, something really perceptive that is not obvious to everybody else. Um, but it's just so removed. Nobody can really understand how they got to that process because it literally just came from them analyzing insights that come from the unconscious, and not about how it relates to the outside world, but just like just really jumping from image to image about the unconscious itself. That's why it's so mystical, because the unconscious itself is already mystical, right? It's already kind of like hard to pin down, it's hard to understand. When you make it extroverted, it's easier to understand, even though you can't fully understand it because it so comes from the unconscious. Because, like you said, it is about external things. When you're with an extroverted, intuitive person, like, you can see where their insights are coming from, right? Especially if they're building from an idea to another idea, you can kind of like follow it if they're talking out loud. With an introverted intuitive, you have no idea where it's coming from. Like, they have the danger not of jumping from thing to thing, but of literally just not making sense to anybody and just being super disconnected from reality, to the point where people are like alienated by them.
And I think that idea that they're often not can be misunderstood. You can see that in the power of NI DOMs when they are listened to. When you think of, you know, again, typing historical figures is always,
Sure.
it's kind of a crapshoot. But like,
Yeah.
at least if you look on the internet, most religious prophets, um, Jesus, Buddha, Zoroaster, all of these prophets typically get tagged as INFJs, and it is maybe something about being able to engage with that nebulous unconscious on this pattern internal pattern recognition, but being able to then figure out a way to eloquently package that and say that can really be effective at getting people to listen. And
Which
same
is
thing with the INTJ. I mean, it's the at least within film and TV and books, it's the like very stereotypical villain role. And it's because they're able to present those ideas in a way that they've thought about it and analyzed it so deeply that people can understand it because they took the time to understand it. They analyzed it so deeply. And I would say both of those types, or really any NI user, but especially the dominant ones, they are going to really need to dig down deep and understand every single facet of a thing before they are ready to move on.
well,
And
and even so, it's like impossible, right? Like you
oh,
can't
of course, yeah.
like
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and it's not actually often that they can actually explain it well, especially if their other functions aren't developed. Because NI on its own, it's just a perception function, so it's just happy thinking through those insights from the collective unconscious, like thinking about all these intuitive things and not necessarily analyzing or attaching themselves into it further. But when they develop those other functions like FE, right? Yeah, maybe FE really knows how to angle insights to get people to understand. Um, I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but it's definitely not easy because there's a lot of things that you can't understand. I had a random thought while I was like reading about NI. Um, and in my mind, they're the most likely type to experience deja vu, um, because they're so in touch with the collective unconscious, which is literally everything that has happened or been thought of throughout human history. So when you're really in that state of just like being in touch with humanity, which is like a really weird, it almost sounds like mystical, it almost sounds bullshit, honestly. Um, you just like that's why NI is almost like unknowing. You know, that's how it comes across. It's like I know that this is true, and it's like, how do you know that it's true? It's like I don't necessarily know, especially if I haven't put it through another judgment filter, but I just know. And it's because with enough data, patterns become really clear. And if your data pool is the entire existence of human consciousness, then you have enough data points to at least make a somewhat accurate conclusion, right? But again, it's all unconscious. Like they might try to understand how they came to it and how it works later, but it just presents itself as an image. Intuition is an unconscious process, um, which is a little bit confusing at times considering these are conscious functions. But it does deal a lot with the unconscious. It's very weird.
Well, that idea of collecting more and more data points, that reminds me, one of my favorite um, famous INFJs, Jordan Peterson, was talking in one video, and he was just talking about his own understanding of people and him having his clinical psychology practice for as long as he did. One can only imagine how many tens of thousands, if not more, hours he has just talking to people.
Oh, yeah.
At that point, not only just by virtue of his profession alone is he going to see so much of what the human condition is like, but then add that to being a dominant NI user,
Oh, yeah.
there's going to be such a solid understanding of how humans are. And that's not always going to be nice. And it's often not nice and not happy finding those patterns amongst people. I think of one, probably my favorite ever TV show is Malcolm in the Middle,
I
and
love that show, dude.
and
It's so funny.
it is. I'm thinking of this one episode in I believe it's the fourth or fifth season where one of the youngest sons of the family, Dewey, is watching his dad Hal. He's got a band with some friends. It's a like a bluegrass band, and they're performing at a talent show. And in this, Dewey is just there, and he just starts asking questions, and he's just like curious, and I think he just wants to learn things, and he asks. I think
He's
the first
supposed to be an
question
INFJ, right?
I think he's an INFJ.
Okay, got it. Just to connect.
That's why that's why I bring him up here, because I think he's doing that process, and he asks something like, "Why are you?" Like he asks his dad, who's in the back. He's like, "Why are you always in the back?" Like just innocently, just asking that, and his dad's like, "Huh, you're right. I am always in the back." And then he asks someone else, like, "Why does he always sing lead instead of you?" Again, he's just asking these questions, but by doing that, the band starts fighting and they break up and they get back together at the end of the episode. But like
Spoilers.
just this, right? Yeah. And it's just funny to see how that like just noticing these patterns about people by asking these questions. He's not trying to do anything, to piss them off, but it still happens. And
Yeah.
like I tell my fiance, like, something that I think is really impressive with her is the ability to just objectively notice patterns, and especially patterns that other people don't want to see. And usually I'm the focus of that, where she can notice patterns of my own behavior and call them out, and I'm like, what the,
No.
I wasn't doing that. And then I have to sit and think, and it's like, oh my gosh, I was doing that. Like I have been acting in that way. But it's that NI ability to just connect things. And I think that leads into that prophetic nature of especially the INFJ type. It's whether or not you think someone is seeing the future, I think it's, if you can connect enough patterns, you can make pretty accurate predictions. It's just building a better model.
Yeah.
And I think NI allows for really fantastic models just because
That's
it's
a
really fine tuned the input.
that's a great way to think about it. Think of it like a some type of model, and it can take input, like it's like a formula or something that can take a value from the outside world and then check it against both a database of both your own past behaviors in this example and the millions or billions of data points from the collective unconscious. All right, ZachXBlade. So, do you have anything to add about the introverted intuition, or should I just go ahead and jump to comparing and contrasting them side by side? Because I do think we need to do that because it can get a little confusing and there's been a lot of things said.
Let's put them next to each other.
All right. So I'm going to start this at a high level, and then ZachXBlade is going to make this more digestible. Okay. So both intuition is an unconscious process that comes to the consciousness for extroverted intuitives and introverted intuitives. And it comes to intuitive types, meaning lead intuitive function, in the form of an image, like a mental image or knowing or something of the sort. With the extroverted intuitive, it is usually about things in the world, right? The object, things outside of the self. It really cares about the world, what's out there. Introverted intuition, it gets images, it gets insights, but it's usually about the collective unconscious directly. It can deal with archetypes and it can deal with patterns that they use basically the collective unconscious as a reference check for, right? So we described it earlier as like a formula. You can take some input from the outside world or various inputs from the outside world and compare it against like this database of collective knowledge. And that's your focus. It's the knowledge itself. It's not the outside. That sounds abstract. So how would you make this bite sized for people?
Intuition, it's just your gut feeling. And when we're talking about extroverted intuition, it is your gut feeling about what's next out in the world. Whereas introverted intuition, it's what do you just think is the correct answer. Again, there's not an easy way to define them, and it's because we don't really know what's going on with the gut feeling.
Yeah.
But either way, though, we are still able to generate stuff that we don't necessarily have an answer for.
Yeah.
And it's just where you're putting that focus.
I also think when we get away from the Jungian side and maybe we just look at like the MBTI side of it, NI is really just a cataloging system at the end of the day from that perspective, right? Where you catalog things that happen and like when you're looking backwards and you're looking into the past, you're cataloging the intangibles of things that have happened to you. And you're also taking things from your gut, right? Like things that you don't know where they come from. And you're putting it together and you're organizing it in a way that gives you some type of insight, normally into the future, right? So extroverted intuitive types like INTJs, INFJs, in an MBTI context are usually like really good planners. They really know what's going to go down in the future because they have.
I think you said extroverted intuitive types, not
Oh, sorry.
introverted.
Yeah, I meant introverted. My bad. Yeah, like they have some type of like weird seer type insight into what's going to happen. I think those are kind of oversimplifications because I do think there's a lot of unconscious stuff that goes into it. But for simplicity's sake, yes. I mean, MBTI, yes, like any is going to look super generative. It is going to look externally like you're jumping from place to place. NI is going to look like you're just observing. It's going to look like cataloging intangible things. And it's going to look like predicting the future and having deep insight. Anyways, guys, thank you for listening. I know this was a little abstract, but hopefully this helps you kind of deepen your understanding about where the MBTI side of intuition came from. It's also helping us understand it, like just learning it directly from Carl Jung himself, what Myers-Briggs is based on. So that's been really interesting. If you've made it this far, thank you, first of all. Second, you're fucking crazy. And
yeah, what a nerd.
Yeah, you're a nerd like us, dude. No, but if you have made it this far, I also want to say that we will be releasing a lot of other videos that are a little more MBTI based and a little bit more digestible. But we do want to have this kind of in-depth Carl Jung cognitive function side to help our understanding. And if anybody's interested, they can come see the basis for our more digestible videos here.
Yeah, I gotta go recharge my FI battery now.
Are you gonna go cry or what?
That's exactly right.
I'm just kidding. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you. Stay tuned for the next.
Alrighty. Bye bye, y'all.